listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Wednesday evening, folks. Welcome to the program. This is Scotty Roberts, your host, and you're watching and listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Now, we're not broadcasting there live tonight, but you can go over to Odyssey Radio, check out the schedule, and see all the times in the day where this show plays. And they're running reruns while we've been down here in Louisiana in the Makeshift Studio. And so soon we'll be back in the home studio, and we'll be broadcasting live on Odyssey again as well. And you can go check them out, see all that they do, all the other shows in their lineup. At the same time, if you're watching this show in archive, you probably found it right here on my YouTube channel, but the actual address is youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Come on over, see all the shows that are in archive here. There's over 500 of them, I think closer to 600 by now. I haven't counted of late, but you can come and see. If you're ever bored and you need something to play while you're doing your work, you can go ahead and tune these shows in. All those shows in video are archived below on my main page. So thanks for being here tonight, folks. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're here. We may have a special guest on tonight. Sarah Soderlund may come in tonight. I don't know for sure yet if she can make it. If she can make it, she'll show up. But she has some things she wants to talk about regarding this fairy realm and the fairy issues. She has clients she works with and other people that she's associated with. And so she just may show up tonight, which would be a real treat for us all. And so I want to say hi to everybody. Leslie Holker, good to see you tonight in the chat room. Master Finn, good to see you as well. Alan Stiles, nice to have you here tonight. Barbie D, it's good to see you. And Elder Barry. And who else is in here? We got Roger Rabbit and Doug Stack. Yeah, I am in the Makeshift Studio tonight, Doug. And who else we got in here? Anybody else right now? Field Guy is here. He's here. We've been waiting on you, so we can get rolling now. Morgan Snow, good to see you. And Beth Kirkham, good to see you as well. Welcome, everybody. And as people keep coming in, I'll say hi as I see you. That's the beauty of going live and having my own show, being able to do that. And so I want to welcome you to the show tonight, everyone. And we're going to continue in our little series on the fairy folk, the fae, and the mystical beings in the spirit realm that we have storybookized or fairy taleized over the centuries. And they're really anything but fairy tales. And you can see even by the name, a fairy tale, how we've relegated them to the realm of imaginative stories. And yet these are spirit beings that exist. And we're going to pick up a little bit where we left off last night. And the only way we'll interrupt the flow tonight is if Sarah comes into the studio and can make it in. So we'll see. And so just hang on to your butts, as they say. We'll see what happens tonight. And I wanted to start kind of where we left off tonight. And there's so much material that I just want to kind of roll into it right away. Even though I want to say, before we get going, let me put one little, if you will, marketing bit and advertisement in here, is that if you want to become a member of this channel on my YouTube channel, please do click on the little join button down below the window, and it will pop up while the show's still going on. You'll just have a little pop-up screen that will show you 3 ways you can become a member of this show. There is a $2 a month charge, a $5 a month charge, and a $15 a month charge. And you get various things for that. So you can go take a look at that, take a peek. I would love to have you join. That helps keep this show going. And, there's not really a lot of expenditures to my research other than my time. So it helps my research. It helps what I do. It helps keep us online. So I appreciate anything that you'd like to do in becoming a member. And also, I guess I have one more announcement. Many of you have seen this already on my Facebook page. I said something about this, but my sojourn in Louisiana and the Makeshift Studio and my makeshift life is swiftly coming to an end. This Friday afternoon, day after tomorrow, we're going to be packing up the truck and heading back to Wisconsin. And so I'm going home for good. We've kind of tapped things dry down here, all of us realized. And so we're packing up this camper and hauling that back up to Minnesota, to the guy who owns this company, back to his place in Minnesota where he lives. He's been down here since last August and going to visit. He goes and visits family fairly often, but all of us have kind of had a run here. And so I didn't meet my goals in wanting to come down here, but we've got a few things we're still closing out. Our crew is going to stay here, and a couple of the guys are going to be flying back and forth to close out any of the jobs that we get, hopefully get closed up in the next couple of weeks. But we are going home. Sam is coming back to Wisconsin with me, and he's going to find a place and get a job up there. And we may even do something with this company up in the Minnesota area. So we'll have to see. Let's see what's going on. So that's my good news for the day. I'm very uplifted by that. We also closed another deal today, and that was a good thing. And we've got 2 more big ones to close. And so if all that happens, we'll get somewhere in the area of getting kind of close to the goal that I had set coming down here. So we'll have to see what this summer brings. And on a personal note, I may have mentioned this, the place where we've been living, the townhome we've been living in for the last 3 years, they are renewing all leases there. And you can either buy your townhome for an exorbitantly expensive cost, or we can move out. And that happens to us at the end of August. So either way, we're going to be moving, whether we get a new house secured, get a new rental place secured, or are able to get loans with our bank to start our shipping container home, or whatever may happen. So I'm coming home. We're in a bit of limbo about that. My wife is probably a little more nervous about that than I am. I tend to not be, and maybe I should. But she likes to have things solid. She likes to know what's going on. Me, I'm kind of like, oh, we got to move next week? We got a few days before we have to start packing. So anyway, all of that to say, I'm very happy for my friends down here. Field Guy, I'm sorry we never got a chance to meet face to face when we're only a couple, 3 hours to the west of you. Doug, we've seen down here. I know that there are some other people. I think James lives here, and other people that are not on this show that live in Louisiana. And so I haven't had a chance to meet everybody. It's been good to see Doug. Come on in. I got somebody knocking at the door during the radio show. And so so that's going on this week. So there you go. That's somebody knocking on the door for Sam. There you go. Live, scintillating live broadcasting. All right. So let's get into the topic for tonight. Let's see what we can do to get us in a really good place with catching up from where we left off last night. Remember last night, in talking about the fairy folk, I started getting into all the descriptions and the characteristics of them. I talked a little bit about the fairy origins. I talked about how there are some out there that believe that the fairy folk are part of this realm of the demonic or evil spirits. And it's mostly been things that have come up through the church. The Roman Catholic Church, the Literalist Orthodox Church, they will tell you that these things are all evil. That they were, one of the theories is that they are spirit beings that were sent to the earth to dwell kind of as an in-between place, between heaven and hell. They were too good for hell, but too bad for heaven. during the wars in heaven, and God cast them down to the earth. These are your earth spirits, your earthbound spirits, your fairies, and all the realm that falls under that. All of these other types of beings, your elementals that fall under that. And so when you hear elementals too, they're also speaking of earthbound spirit type beings or interdimensional beings. And so when we're looking at all of this stuff, we say, is there evil associated with them? Are they evil characters? Are they demonic characters? Well, if you were to take maybe word for word from biblical text and apply biblical teaching through the church and other religious organizations that attach to the Bible, you might conclude that yes, these are evil beings, but they're not mentioned by name in the scripture. And while fairies have the ability to do really evil things, they also have the ability to be very good and very benevolent. And in the, as we mentioned the other night, in the Irish countryside, as you go into the old Celtic lore, their superstition would not even allow to call them the Fae or the fairy folk, or by their proper names, their spirit being names. They refer to them as the good people, the wee folk, the good folk, the little people, the little folk, and so on. And by the way, Siani, nice to see you. Oh, I see you can't stay. You got to help break down everything and move back downstairs. We got a prime rib for the kids upstairs and a jazz band. Now comes the cleanup. I hear that, the cleanup. But you have a good night. It was nice to see you here. And so these beings, we left off at a point in talking about them where we're looking at the bewitchment and the witchcraft that's surrounding these beings. As do witches, fairies have this magical ability to bewitch people and animals and to blight crops, to blight your health. And in Irish lore, the Tuatha De Danann took refuge upon the mill by the MIL by blighting wheat crops and spoiling milk. And when Christian elements entered the fairy lore, it became customary to dip a thumb in fresh milk and make the sign of the cross to ward off fairies. You do this. And that's the way they would ward off the fairies. And if a person insults or displeases fairies, they have the power to transform him into a beast, a stone, or something else in nature. And bewitched and fairy possessed people and animals who act strangely or sicken or fall into trances or even seizures are called fairy struck and elf shot. And the latter term refers to invisible arrows shot into people and animals. So fairies teach witches their magical lore and casting of spells. And I pulled that information from an occultist site that specializes in teaching magic and black magic and the powers of magic. And this was what they had to say about it. Now, I want to talk about, for a minute, changelings. When I read the story of Tam O'Hare to you, elements of that story, there was a changeling involved. They stole the little girl and left a stick in her place and put a glamour on the stick, and the stick looked like the dead body of the little girl. And the parents rose up in the morning and found their child dead. It wasn't really their child, but they would bathe the child and give her a funeral and bury her. And eventually the glamour would wear off. If they would dig up that child for any reason in the near future, that glamour may have worn off the stick, and they'll find just a stick in the grave clothes. Also, we read Jamie Freel and the Young Lady, or Jamie Freel and the Fairies. The same thing, they put a glamour on the stick and had the young woman that they stole, that the stick turned into a glamour of her as a dead woman. And so fairies are well known for stealing human babies and substituting their own ugly babies in their place. And the taking happens at night when a child is asleep or when it's napping unattended. And Evan Wentz, in his book, gives the following quoted oral account from France about a woman and her 3 children as an example of this. When she had her first child, a very strong and very pretty boy, she noticed one morning that he'd been changed during the night. There was no longer the fine baby that she had put to bed in the evening. There was instead an infant hideous to look at, greatly deformed, hunchbacked, and crooked, and of a black color. And we're not talking negroid as by way of black, but black like ash black color. And the poor woman knew that a wee fairy had changed the child. And this changed infant still lives, and today he is about 70 years old. He has all the possible vices, and he has tried many times to kill his mother. He's a veritable demon. He predicts the future and has a habit of running abroad at night. They call him the Little Corrigan, a type of fairy, and everybody flees from him. Being poor and infirm now, he's obliged to beg, and people give him alms because they have a great fear of him. His name is Olier. The woman had 2 other children who also were said to be normal at birth, but were stolen by the fairies and also became demonic hunchbacks. Then she was advised by a wise woman to put a sprig of boxwood, blessed by a priest, in the cradle, and the fairies would be repelled. She did so for her 4th child, and it was not affected. The idea of changelings might have explained problems in infants that were not apparent at birth, but developed later, and even crib death or sudden infant death syndrome, the SIDS. And the affected infants were not unrecognizable or completely different, but they were changed for the worse in noticeable ways. And so this is the way in older times that they thought if they got a deformed child, they may have thought that the child was a changeling placed there by the fairies. Then you have the whole idea of possession and exorcism. And changelings result from possession. An entity steals a soul during their sleep. And the changelings were thus fairy possessed, as the preceding account shows. And a changeling had demonic characteristics, much as a person possessed by a demon does. An altered personality, evil tendencies and acts, supernormal abilities like prophecy and magic, and an altered physical appearance. A hunchback is even called a veritable demon. Now, of course, back in the Dark Ages and in older times, we thought that many illnesses were caused by the demonic, by evil spirits and things like that. Yeah, it does, Leslie, doesn't it? Sound like something out of Pet Cemetery. So in the case of changelings, the possession was usually permanent. Exorcism remedies exist in fairy lore, and how effective they were probably depended on the nature of the problem that was affecting the infant. One remedy in French lore, as an example, was to leave a changeling outdoors. The fairies would hear it cry and take it back, leaving the true child in its rightful place. And there are accounts of this kind of thing happening, and many times the child would just die because it was left to the elements, left out in the woods. Fairies were well known for bewitching milk, and exorcisms of milk once were very common in folklore practices. The vessel for containing the milk was exorcised, and it was blessed by a priest. And so was the milk that was poured into it. And demons, as well as fairies, possessed milk. Sometimes little or no distinction was made between one and the other. The biography of the Irish patron Saint Columba, who lived in the 6th century, tells a story about the saint's exorcism of milk. The Vita Columbae was written by Adamnan, the abbot of Iona. Iona is a place you can go on an island in Ireland, where it said St. Patrick had been there. There was a founding of a monastery there, and a church. And one day a youth named Columban did the milking and took the pail to St. Columba for exorcism. And the saint made a sign of the cross in the air, but the lid flew off and most of the milk spilled. Columba said, "Thou hast done carelessly in thy work today, for thou hast not cast out the demon that was lurking in the bottom of the empty pail, by tracing on it, before pouring the milk, the sign of the Lord's cross, and now not enduring, thou seest the virtue of the sign, he has quickly fled away in terror, while at the same time the whole of the vessel has been violently shaken and the milk spilled." And Columba then ordered half full pail to be carried to him for exorcism. When he blessed it, the pail miraculously filled with milk as the tale goes. Now, one old folk custom in Brittany, France, called for the burning of green branches on the summer solstice. Domestic farm animals were passed through the smoke, which exorcised all evil spirits and fairies and protected them from bewitchment and possession. In the case of the cows, it especially guaranteed the abundant supply of milk. Now you can see how sometimes our superstitions got away with us. Sometimes even in the church, superstitious things were dealt with superstitiously. Now, does that mean that none of these things existed? Or does that mean that they were right in every case? Not necessarily. So, as we have said, these are beings that exist. They exist in the ether, that diaphanous place between the physical and the spirit realm. And so, did these things really exist? Were these priests really casting demons out, the fairy demons out of the milk and things like that? There's a lot of question on that because the fairies, according to lore, liked milk and they would taint the milk when they would take it. Notre Dame burned down and now the Hunchback is possessed. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is more than smell. Sounds like something straight out of Pet Sematary, said Leslie. Now, fairies in contemporary, I'm not commenting on the Hunchback possession because I don't know. But now that was, of course, in Victor Hugo's tale of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And by the way, my kids corrected me once. The news was talking about the football games at Notre Dame in Indiana. And I said, oh, I wonder who Notre Dame is playing this weekend. The kid said, Dad, that's Notre Dame. So there you go. That's what a Disney cartoon taught my kids. The animated version of that, which is, by the way, a very good animated film. It's made for kids and so on. It's got some beautiful music and songs in it. Did you hear that song that was that came from that movie? Demi Moore voiced Esmeralda in that, but somebody sang her part. And I think Bette Midler did a version of this song after that. The movie came out, 20 years ago. Do you remember that? She says, it's Esmeralda when she's taking sanctuary in the church and she's praying and she sees the statuary of Mary and so on. And she's a gypsy. She doesn't know much about this stuff. And she sings that song, I don't know if you can hear me or if you're even there. I don't know if you will listen to a gypsy's prayer. Yes, I know I'm just an outcast. I shouldn't speak to you. Still I see your face and wonder, were you once an outcast too? And she's singing the statue of Mary. God help the outcasts, humble from birth, show them the mercy they don't find on earth. And then she goes into, please help my people, the poor and downtrodden. I thought we all were the children of God. And it ends the song, God help the outcast, children of God. And that song is a beautiful song, but it's a great rendition of this. So, anyway, moving on. There are some fairies in contemporary lore. Now, since Victorian times, fairies have been increasingly stripped of their really formidable powers, and they've been trivialized as little beings with wings or female ballerina-like figures with wands. And the fictitious Tinkerbell, created by Scottish novelist J.M. Barrie, who wrote the Peter Pan stories in the early 20th century, also added to the degrading of fairies to inconsequential little creatures. And the continuing portrayal of fairies in popular media is of cute, magical little beings with no demotic associations whatsoever. The Tooth Fairy. Look at the Tooth Fairy, who leaves money in an envelope in exchange for teeth underneath the pillow of a child who's lost their tooth. And that's still very popular with small children. So you see, the fairy folk, there's a lot of mythology around them. There's a lot of folklore built up around them. So I want to get into a couple of other things tonight. I wanted to talk about the accounts of fairies, and I don't see Sarah hanging in the wings, so we might not have her tonight. We may have her another night. I invited her rather late because she mentioned something that said, really, she said she knows people and has clients that are involved in this kind of thing. And I said, maybe you should come on the show tonight. She said, well, maybe. Let me see what my schedule looks like. And she's not going to make it in, I don't think, because I haven't seen her yet. But I want to talk a little bit about, I'm between a couple of different things. We're about halfway through the show already. And I want to talk about the reality of fairies and the confusing the sightings of fairies and female and male fairies. And how do you see a fairy as the fairy really is? What do fairies really look like? And then, do you believe in the fae? And do fairies really exist? There's all of these things. And then I want to talk about, and then I'm struck with, do I talk about this one? I want to see, how do you see a fairy? How do you exercise and advise the best places to become aware of fairies, the fae, nature spirits, and so on? So how to approach becoming aware of nature spirits, how to start connecting with or attracting nature spirits, nature divas, or other elemental beings. I want to look at that. I'm almost more interested to go into that before I start the other, because you see, there's a lot of material on this. I'm still feeling like, even though we've talked about the reality of the fae, of the fairy beings, of elementals, if you will, how I still, on the third night of this, am feeling like, I feel like I'm not really getting to the meat of who they really are. And so the big question is, would you want to attract these beings to yourself? And by attracting them, are you conjuring spirits that you shouldn't conjure? And so you have to kind of look at it and say, do I believe that these things really exist? And is there any benefit to calling on them for blessing? Here's an example of this. When we talk about, in some mythology and in church lore, they've certainly relegated fairies to the demonic or the evil spirit realm. Yet they're capable of doing great good as well and bestowing blessing. But you can easily offend them. So the question is, do you want to conjure them? Or don't use the word conjure, use the word invite them. Do you want to invite them into your gardens, into your homes, and things like that? So you first have to ask yourself if you really believe they exist and what you think about them. There's an attitude amongst dimensionally challenged scientists, if you will, that people will simply imagine or create these beings in their mind. They create what they believe, in a sense, like Buddhism or Far Eastern religion will tell you making tulpas. We bring life to something that doesn't exist. And this is a fairly obvious assumption from a group of people whose training in part is about staying distanced from personal experience. Science isn't about incorporating anecdotal experience or personal experience or even spiritual experience or feelings or imaginations and even intuition, while striving to be logical and rational and observant. This is what the scientist does. This is what the skeptic will say they do. They say, I'm being a scientific mind. Well, maybe they aren't at all, but they're trying to affect this feeling and or this logical and rational and observant over the feeling and the imagination and the intuition and the experience. If you tell somebody who's a scientist, well, I know you don't have a scientific explanation for ghosts or spirits, but I've seen them. I've experienced them. They're going to get a little poo-poo and a chuckle if they're polite, and they'll tell you, well, that's your anecdotal experience. If they're real, why can we not study them? Why is there not the scientific method that can be applied to them? Morgan Snow says, believe that they exist, but not draw them to me. I'm going to talk about this, Morgan. I'm going to talk about this, why we would draw them in and how you can do this. So this whole scientific attitude and orientation actually prevents people from properly and deeply understanding and engaging with their own internal processes, their own feelings, their own landscape. And if you fully engage with your internal states, your feeling states, your mind states, and your processes, intuition, imagination, senses, dream states, and spend time consciously in them, then you're going to become more familiar from repeated experiential experience with your own internal workings, to know that their boundaries and their limits, that they have boundaries and limits, and therefore have no problem telling the inner internal from the internal, the inner external, what to believe and how to deal with these things. So I'm sensitive enough to my feelings and my emotions to know the differences between feelings arising spontaneously in the moment or whether they are reactive feelings being provoked in response to a past trauma or a block. And I even know the subtle differences that tell me that a feeling originates not in this life, but sometimes even in a past life. And so the above exchange with fairies that I talked about confirms that what I believe about them, or more accurately, what I know about fairies, didn't result in my internal memory or my belief states confirming or even matching up with prior expectations or preconceived notions. So we have to ask ourselves, what is belief and what is experience? When is a belief a belief? Is the first question. Now, we've talked about this in other realms and other types of topics on this show. What do you believe? Why do you believe what you say you believe? So I have trouble in terms of how people define what's a belief. You could say that a belief exists when repeated experience is lacking. I've never seen God face to face, but I believe God exists, is a belief. Repeated experience of seeing and directly and consistently interacting with nature's spirits, including fairies, takes a person out of the realm of belief and into something completely different. The big question is, are we manifesting some of those things when we act that way? Hang on. So, Durwood, good to see you. Morning, folks, he says. Are you up late or are you in another part of the world? I don't know for sure. So it's good to see you. So from all of this, I have to be adamant that I absolutely don't believe, do not believe in the fairy folk, in the fae, in the same way that I have to believe in chairs and tables because they're a consistent part of my reality. I've interacted with fairies and other nature spirits at periods and times in my life. I've definitely interacted with other kinds of spirits. I've seen that happen. Don't think I'm too odd. I'm a pretty normal guy. You know, I mow my grass like everybody else. I go to work and I make money and I pay my bills. And I get frustrated and, you know, I have kids and I have a wife and I have a bicycle and a car and all of those things that make me a fairly normal person. I dress in normal clothes. I get my hair cut. I shave most every day. And, you know, all these normal things. But I also have a belief in things, but that is not belief. See how easy it even rolls off of my tongue while I'm trying to explain it. I've had experiences over the years, and they're also consistent for others that have also developed the ability to see these beings. Now, I don't really see. I'm not clairvoyant. I'm not clairsentient. But I believe you can develop that if you choose to. And so, quite simply, these beings, these people, I'm talking about the fae and the fairy folk, the good people, they exist. And they're somewhat more friendly than many rational types, even when you bother them with stupid questions. So I don't believe in fairies because they actually exist. However, I personally do believe that centaurs exist. You know, kind of. It's a belief. I've never seen one, never interchanged with one or interacted, but maybe I believe they once existed. So that's a belief. Because despite that I have never seen one, I've heard others who say they have. So I have this tacit belief in something. That doesn't mean I know it. It means I believe it. There's a difference between believing and knowing things. So, and those of you coming to the show, hey Audrey, good to see you. Nice to have you here. I want to see if anybody else I missed that came in. I don't think so. Barbie D. Can't remember if I said hi to you earlier, Barbie D, or not. But welcome if I did. There, you got it twice. So, as a species, it's a fact that humans are progressively disengaging from their feelings and subtle sensory states while barricading ourselves into a severely limited intellectual headspace. If we can't see it, touch it, taste it, feel it, handle it, talk with it, have coffee with it, it doesn't exist. We have taken the spirit realm and the things of belief systems and relegated them to just that, to believe, oh, we believe that. It's a spiritual belief. We're in the here and the now. We need intellectual, we need scientific, we need hardcore data. So there's a way to learn to become aware of the fae and of fairies and nature spirits. And you know what? I don't think you have to be afraid of this stuff. I don't think it's like toying with the demonic, because I don't think that's what you're dealing with here. You're dealing with a different form of entity. And to open yourself up enough to say, I'd like to see if this really exists. I want to know things. So you try some things out. Some people listening to this might be interested in trying to become aware of fairies directly themselves. And there are ways you can do this. And I wanted to look at a couple of more detailed passages on doing this, how to take care of this, how to do that. So you can attract fairies by making simply a fairy house. This sounds kind of silly. I know Teresa Danton had posted something in social media the other day about fairy houses, or anybody feel fairy gardens. So anybody want to make a fairy house? Then have a look at stuff online where you can see fairy houses. You can take a look at the rules. There are actually rules to build a fairy house. And I could give you some links to some of that stuff later, but there's ways to do this. How far back in history do fairy folk tales originate? And how old are some fairy tales? Well, it turns out that folk tales and languages from parts of Europe and Asia have helped researchers date the origins of some stories to thousands of years ago. The roots of the oldest tale of fairy creatures from a folk tale called The Smith and the Devil can be traced back to the Bronze Age. Some fairy tales are thought to be up to 6,000 years old. And a database of more than 2,000 types of folk tales and stories of magic, including stories of beings or objects with supernatural powers, has allowed some researchers to compare the relationship between different folk tales and language, as well as of how folk tales may have been shared by neighboring peoples, and revealed 76 fairy stories that they thought could be used to accurately estimate a folk tale's age. And do you think you've seen or felt the presence of a fairy or of a nature spirit? Have you had a fairy encounter or experience? Anybody in this chat room listening to this show tonight, have you had an experience like that? Tell us about it. Mention it. If there's somebody here, there's nothing to be ashamed of that. If I say I've seen a ghost, I'll certainly tell you. You think you've seen a fairy. The only thing is the connotation of the word fairy, because we place such storybook housing around it. Do you think you've encountered elementals and fairy folk of any type? So I want to talk about how you see a fairy, how you find a way to draw them in and experience them. So I've seen cryptids, said Doug. I know a lot of people have. Morgan Snow says you've seen fairies a long time ago. Here, let's see. You know what? Let me see if I can find that link to the fairy house. Let's see. Hold on a second here. See if I can put a link into the chat room. File is not found. I'm looking to see if there's another place for it. Not found. I'll have to find a different link. The link I had isn't working. Leslie, I'll see if I can find that. So the first thing you have to do, there's an exercise to help you encounter or meet with all types of fairies or fae or natural spirits, nature spirits. And when people I know that have experienced this, their awakening was usually in a place in the woods. And it was somewhere that can draw you in. If you find a natural spot in the woods, if you go walking through the woods, or you know something, it's a place that will draw you in. When we had our ranch, I was drawn to that place in the woods. And this is very important. If you've established a connection with some place like this, it's a place that almost was, in one sense, making yourself known and felt to the beings there, and they noticed you without you even having to talk about anything. And that's how you become aware of them. They know that you have a sense of them and their special place. So, like anything else, the feelings that you get about things, trust your intuition. We've talked about intuition. We've talked about meditating and things like that. Trust your intuition. Trust where you are drawn, and that's where your energy is going to take you. So the first thing that you should do to gain an awareness of nature spirits is to cultivate a sense of the woods and the forests that attract you. Now, if you live in the city or a country where you don't have any woods around you, out in the country or something, but you're not near forested areas, find those places. We had you wouldn't call it a deep, dense forest, but when Rainey and I had the house a few years ago, we only had 4 acres, but it butted up into several other properties of 4 acres and some wild areas with the big ponds and all the old growth trees. I was drawn out into there, and we started to become very familiar with that place. So go to the places that attract you. If you don't feel attracted to a place, or something is making you say, I don't really feel comfortable there, or that's not high on my list for a place to go, that's not the place you go seek this stuff out. Leslie said, here are some adorable fairy houses. I don't know if that's the kind of house you want to build, like little children's toy cities or something. It's a little different, I think, than building a proper fairy house. I'll get some plans, and maybe by tomorrow night I'll show you where we can find that. Doug Stack says, I swear I saw one that looked like a garden gnome, but I may have been high. Sometimes you got to watch how you're looking at things. Morgan Snow says, my hubby saw one about 2 years ago sitting in our leaf pile. And Matt said, that'd be a little creepy. And you kind of wonder about it. If I see something like that, is it going to scare the shit out of me? And that's possible. That unknown factor. Why does it scare us so much? Because we've relegated them to the realm of the non-existent. And then when you encounter these things, it's the unknown. What happens when you see a ghost? It scares you. Even if you're preparing yourself to see a ghost, it still scares you. Spirit being. So look for places that have a lot of ancient woodland that are well kept, and then wander around. Don't so much wander to specifically look for something, rather wander to be drawn somewhere. Let the place draw you in. And it's almost subconscious, it's intuitional. Don't go, now I'm going to walk down this path to see if I'm drawn in. It's not that. Just walk. Meditate while you walk, soak it in, and find out where you're drawn. And so to find this special place, some would say an energy place is what you're going to find. Although you could also say somewhere that feels right to you and that draws you into itself. Now, it doesn't have to be a woodland. In the United Kingdom and Great Britain, there are very few pristine or very natural places like that left. So a place in nature that's natural or undisturbed is a reasonable good bet to have some nature spirits. And better still beside some clear water or a stream. Just go out to the woods. I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately. Wanted to take a bite out of life and suck all the marrow from the bones of life and put to death all that was not life, so that not when I came to die, I would realize I had not yet lived. This is the kind of place you go to, things that draw you. And so how can you feel or sense a presence or an atmosphere when nature spirits are close by? Now, I'm going to tell you, folks, I have not seen a fairy. I have not seen the fae. I have not seen the fairy folk. I've not seen elementals so far as I know. I think I've seen other beings. Do you remember how biblical text tells you when you entertain a stranger, give them your hospitality? For many of us have entertained angels unaware that we were doing so. I think I've encountered beings like that, or what we may call that. So, I'm going to approve Doug's message there. So, it has to be someone that's got an atmosphere that draws you in. It's a mystery or a presence or a place that feels sacred to you. Have you ever walked in a place and you go, this feels like a sacred place to me? So somewhere that when you wander around not thinking too much, you end up at. And I'm not talking like Target or, the comic book shop or the lingerie store or whatever. It's not what we're talking about here. It's someplace in the wild, in the natural beauty, someplace with old growth in it. Somewhere that when you sit on your own in the silence of your own space, you feel more your own presence too. You feel more in touch with yourself. This is very important. Nature spirits are not celebrities. They don't invite exposure. But if you find somewhere that feels right to you and feels special, then the chances are that any nature spirit is going to notice you as much as you notice them. And over time, they may remember you and may become curious, as I did with some people that I know. So, cemeteries, where your loved ones are, very sacred, says Leslie Hope. The swing in your yard, there is that. Hey, Susie Q, nice to see you. She goes, so got all my potatoes planted. Stop by to say hello, and I love you all. Getting in the shower. It's that time of year, Captain. Favor of love, light, peace, and health to you all. So says Susie Q. So welcome, Susie Q. Glad to see you have stopped by. Leslie says, listening to the silence, the loons, the rest of nature. That's sacred to me. So find that sacred space. Remember when I said we were talking a long time ago about the mysteries and being awake, not woke, being awake, being aware, and aware that you're awake, and aware of the dream state of the world around you, that you are fluid outside of that stream, and that you are then able to meditate and put yourself in a place where you can commune with nature around you, where you can feel comfortable meditating. This is the kind of place I'm talking about. It might be sitting underneath the tree in your own backyard. But keep in mind, your backyard is surrounded by an urban center, unless you're out in the country. You're going to have a neighbor on that side and that side, maybe even behind you. The idea is to get away, go walk somewhere, go find a path through the woods, and see how that makes you feel. That's what I miss about my ranch, because we had a place out in the woods there. There were no paths. We made paths by walking them. I miss the property that Rainey and I had with the house there in Somerset, where we could walk out in the woods in the back 40, so to speak. And you know what? If you get yourself embedded into a natural place like that, you meditate there. You meditate by being there. You're going to get noticed. Now you could say that this is about, it's almost like starting a friendship, if you will. It's like you may, if you enter a frequent coffee shop or a cafe, not strike up a conversation with the owner until you've been there 4 or 5 times. And until you can recognize each other and feel comfortable in each other's presences, you wouldn't be going back into that cafe regularly if it didn't feel right to you, if it didn't suit you. This is the same kind of thing on a very different level, a very different plane. Hey, Michelle Canham McFree, good to see you. Nice to have you here. So begin as you would a good friendship. Treat your special space in nature in the same way, as a place to begin a friendship. Because this is, in a sense, what you're trying to do if you're trying to attract these nature spirits, these fairy beings, these elementals. You're saying that you're there in that place because it feels right to you. And you want to meet others that feel right here also. So in the same way, as in the cafe, you would take time to get used to your surroundings. You don't make an effort to connect with anybody, at least not the first few times, but you just establish your own space there. Here I am. I like this spot under this tree. And I'm going to sit here. This is what I like. And I'm going to come here. I'll read. I'll meditate. I'll do whatever. And you establish your own space. Do the same in your nature space too. When you decide that you have found your special place, then go there. Spend 30 minutes to an hour. But don't be pushy. Don't be expectant. Maybe take a book or just sit and relax and watch your breath. Just be in this space without invading it, but by being part of it. And in the same way as the cafe experience, you're going to find a place to sit that feels right. This has got the vantage point you want. This is you like this cushion, you like your view of this and that and the other thing. I can picture that in my head right now. This is your seat. This is the place that best represents you. When we used to go to the Irish pubs, back before I knew Rainey and I used to hang out with my friends at the Irish pub a lot more, there was a corner of the bar, the big long bar. And those of you from the Minneapolis area know the Halftime Rec in St. Paul. That's where they, and I've mentioned this before, that's where they filmed parts of the movie Grumpy Old Men. It came out, 20 years ago. And that was the bar in that film, but it's an Irish pub. And way down at the far end of the long bar, I would stand at the corner there with my friends. We'd all occupy that corner. My spot was the very corner spot on the bar, and we weren't sitting usually. There were stools there, but we'd stand by the bar. And eventually I told the bartender, I said, I need to have a brass plaque here. It's Scotty's spot at the bar. So this is the kind of thing. What best represents you? So now, how do you become aware? And how do you contact nature spirits? It takes time. So take the same seat in your nature space, the place where you like to go and spend time, the place that you find affinity. Don't try and catch anyone's eye. Just become a presence there. And when you become a regular, you're going to be noticed. And you won't frighten anyone away. And also there's a more of a chance that you're going to come to notice the presence of other regulars too in that space. So do this in your favorite woods or your favorite spot in nature. You'll be able to find yourself drawn to the same place in the woods, sitting on the same spot each time. You may not even know why. You may have a spot like that already, and you don't know why. Why do I always go to that spot? I always like that spot. It just feels right. And I know of somebody who took a friend who was then aware of the things that she pointed out. And that they were always sitting at the center of an earth energy point. That was the center of a large tree circle. My friend had never felt this, but it felt right. So it's best to find somewhere that's quiet, not busy. You don't want to do it right off a running path through the woods. Quiet, not busy. Has a few people passing by, as nature spirits like their privacy. As few, not a few. And so there are places you can go. You can go to national parks. There are state parks. There's the Willow River State Park, about 20 minutes from our house in Wisconsin. And there are some beautiful places to go there and find that spot. What did I see here that I'm missing? Doug's down 8 months away from being cancer-free for 5 years. Sorry. Pray for my brother Doug and his son, please. Declan and his son. Please do, folks. Sending prayers up. Michelle says, goosebumps, more prayers up for him and his family, Doug. Leslie says, we have Lake Maria State Park right behind us. Oh, by the way, Leslie, on Sunday, Rainey's got to come and pick me up in Becker, Minnesota, where we're dropping off the campers and the trucks. And she's going to come and pick me up. That's somewhere near your neck of the woods, I think. You're somewhere around, not Monticello, further out, St. Cloud. So if you're going to be around, we'll have to see what time of day it all happens. Maybe you'll be around the area. That was for you specifically, Leslie. So here's what you do also. When you're out in this natural place, you got to avoid negative and uncomfortable or disturbing or disturbed places. Avoid places that have been used for drunken or drug-based parties or meetings. Just avoid those places. You don't want to go there. Avoid places that have been used for rituals. As some people's intentions in doing rituals are, let's say, they're not always aligned with the good, and therefore there's a possibility of not so good things being in the vicinity. You're going to feel this at a place when you're there. Distressed places tend to have misshapen trees with twisted branches. Some trees will avoid negative energies while others will seek them out. Believe me, this is a real thing. So this can cause some bizarre branching. I've seen large branches, 6 inches in diameter, within a foot of the main trunk, turn 180 degrees to twist all the way around the trunk to avoid a negative energy spot. And branches of some species will curl or be pushed up while others will droop toward peculiar energies. Remember when Rocky and I would go out and Sarah would come with us as well. And Rainey came with me this last year when we went out to the festival grounds, the Renaissance Festival grounds in Minnesota, and did some ghost hunting for one of the banquets there. And there are places on that site that are negative places because negative things have taken place there. And you'll know them, and you'll feel them. A friend of mine once met a groundsman of the Duke of Northumberland to point out a tree and a stone circle. And they thought they were on the property and in danger of being destroyed. And as a woodsman, he would tell immediately the area of the negative energies by the distressed and crazy growth of the trees growing around it. And he was quite taken aback by this. It was so obvious. Barry Fitzgerald, who is going to be with us next Tuesday, tells of a place in Ireland where you look at a view of it from up above. We were going to go visit this place. All the trees have grown in like an outward circle away from this place, just outward and outward and outward. And it's a very unusual place, not understood very well by science. And I'll have him talk about that when he's with us. So go with your feelings out there. If you feel uneasy about a place, then don't spend time there, and certainly don't try to connect with what's causing the uneasy feeling. At least not unless you have a lot of experience with such things. Now, nature spirit and awareness exercises. An exercise to help you sense and feel and maybe see nature spirits more quickly, to improve your awareness and your abilities or sense nature spirits. The idea is how to contact, and I wish Teresa were here to talk about this a little bit, how to contact your spirit guides, your friends, those very real things. If you know anything about that, contacting spirit guides, it's going to be useful for you as you kind of play or work with this, and you're going to more deeply sense and interact with any nature spirits that you draw to yourself. Once you've established an association with nature spirits in one place, then you're going to find it's easier to do the same in other places. Now, perhaps the reason many of us have never seen these things is we've never opened ourselves up enough to be open to inviting them to interact with us. Now, this is different. I'm not saying invite them to inhabit you. This is not like possession. This is inviting interaction, inviting contact. So there's a list of nature spirits, at least most of the ones that I know have been encountered by people I know, and also where you can be likely to find them. In some cases, what to do, and how to make it more possible for yourself. And I'm sure there's probably lots more types, but here you go. Here's a short list. Where do you find a water nymph or a water spirit? Example, to meet a water for spirit, then sit or stand on a rock in the middle of a stream. You may well feel the presence by the movement of the water energies within you. Um, and it's almost the same way if a water spirit is connecting to you. You're going to feel that. Where do you find dryads or tree nymphs or spirits? And the same for a tree spirit. You sit with your back to a tree, or better still, find a tree with a space in its roots to sit within. And I found trees like that. You have to be in a woodland that you trust, of course, close to where you live, maybe, and where you take walks and you get out and away from things. That's a good place to have nature spirit guided awareness walks, so to speak, to connect with nature spirits. And many who came to this kind of a spot would use this under tree space to successfully connect with spirits of the tree. The tree circle that was my starting point for any awakening was a tree that my friend said was cut down years later. And I went back a few days later, she said, to work with the tree dryads to help them move on from the shock and trauma. And we spent some time doing healing in this place and moving some of the tree spirits to other places to live. Now, if that all sounds really wacky to you, it does to me even at first blush. But sometimes you have to consider the person who's giving you this information. Are they a credible source? James says, wouldn't they interact based off your actual needs? Maybe. I don't think it's so much your needs, James, as it is you being open to simply interact with them, and they'll interact with you. It could be a little frightening at first, I think, because sometimes you don't know what you're talking to, or you're going to be startled by the realization that something is there with you. Now, you don't have to do this at night in the dark. Go out on a sunny sunshine day and go for a little walk in the woods. Find your spot. Keep revisiting the place that you are drawn to. Now, of course, sea spirits, mer people, do they exist? Probably not, I say in my head. But if we're open to the spirits, to the she, to connect with these kinds of creatures, you have to be in or by the sea. Remote, clean, unpopulated places. Sit on a rocky outcrop as close to the sea as possible. I don't know how many of you in here listening live by the sea or the ocean, but project your consciousness out into the sea, deep underwater, to make your presence felt. Are there mermaids? My daughters would tell you yes. They make mermaid tails. But are there creatures we don't know of? Are there spirit beings? Maybe. There's a lot of Celtic lore. Now, there's a fantastic animated film, if you've not seen it. I think we talked about it on here once. Same people who made The Secret of the Kells also made The Song of the Sea. And you should look those up. Made by an Irish company. Animated. Really, really moving movies. The Great Lakes, says Matt Finn, have captured many souls to its waters. Indeed. You could go to, I was thinking of, Matt, before you even said that, I was thinking of Lake Superior. I love the North Shore of Lake Superior. We drive up to Duluth, which is about an hour and a half to 2 hours north of us. And then you go about another hour and a half north along the North Shore as the lake starts to widen. And it's you find the rocky coastlines, the cliffs along the coastlines, with the breakers that are like the ocean down there on the shore of Lake Superior. I like going back in the woods up there into the Gooseberry Falls area, the Split Rock Lighthouse area, Two Harbors, that place. So there's beach and sand spirits you can go to. Go to the desert. Go to the beach. The best place to find fairies. These are spirits that tend to sit in the center part of a small tree space. I know somebody that found one tree that was regularly occupied and had people sit part way up in this tree to become aware of this fairy. You can find pixies. You can look for them. It's in vegetation at ground level and so on. Decomposing, composting materials in the woods, natural, unspoiled. Dwarves, we're not talking the physical deformity, if you will, but dwarves in this, and gnomes in the sense of spirit beings. Some of these I have a little harder time with, admittedly. Trolls, things like that. Elves, are there elves? Remember when I spoke about the Nephilim, how Tolkien, when he wrote the Lord of the Rings novels, spoke of the elven people, the bright shining kings from the north or from the sky in Celtic lore, the tall, elegant, white blonde, shining skin characters, these kings from the heavens. They were the elves, the elven folk. The salamanders, the leprechauns. No, you're not going to find them at the end of a rainbow. So if Jennifer, my yeoman, was here, she could speak to this. Newcastle upon Tyne in England, just outside the university. There was somebody I know that went and sat on a bench during a lunch break, and from what they could recall, he spent most of his time trying to talk the piss out of me, which took me back to start with, he said. But later I evened it up, and somewhere along the way did the same to him. And likely being cheeky, it was Cornwall, Devon, or other places. So where to find nature spirits? It all depends on where you go. All of these places, anywhere, although you probably have to already have nature spirit connections for beings to make their presence felt to you. You can find them in high energy places, tree circles, and the like, as well as very well kept places. And there's a lot more of these. You go through Herne, the hunter, the horned, like a deer, stag. There's the Black Knight as guardian. There's Pan. There's the fairy queens, the woman in blue. These are all beings that you can find. There are some people that will even insist good, solid, intellectually sound people will say they've met dragons and unicorns. That's a tougher one for me. So what do you do now? There's exercises that you can have. And I've got some links, and I'll give you some links to these things. And we'll maybe put it out to the members of the group in a newsletter form. And so there you go, folks. There it is. There's ways that you can connect yourself to the spirit beings that are out there. I'm talking about the natural spirits, the elementals, the fae, the fairy folk, and the other like things. Let's see. Matt Finn, you live, what, 25 miles from Lake St. Clair? I had friends that lived by Lake St. Clair, had boats out there when I lived out there in Michigan. So. And yeah, you have an affinity for the nautical history. The Great Lakes is a great place to do that. James says, are there nature spirits that endure in modernized cities? Not as much, James. Here is the going thinking, the nomenclature of this is that the more urbanized a place becomes, the less natural it is. And it drives the natural spirits out and away. So you have to go to the woods. You have to go to the natural places. There's a little thing that I read a long time ago on the show. It was the last chapter, almost like the epilogue of a book by Malcolm McCourt. I think it was Malcolm McCourt. And Malachi McCourt. his brother, Frank McCourt, had written Angela's Ashes years ago. And he wrote a little more solid memoir. And he talked about his father and growing up in Limerick, Ireland, and places like that. And at the end, he spoke of the fairy spring, the well that his father talked about. And he took him over all the lands to find it and walked through pastures and woods and finally found the place where the spring was. And it was the sweetest water he'd ever tasted, sprouting up out of the ground in a field. And he said after his father died, he went back one day in his memory to try to find that place. And he said he tromped over every field and every path and every woodland in that area and could never find the spring again. And so there are places like that. So I think you've got to get away from the city, away from the urban, or get into centers within the city. Could there be fairies in Central Park? Natural spirits? I would almost want to say no. It's too urbanized, too cultured, quote unquote, if you will. So anyway, there you go, folks. That's what we got for tonight. We never did get Sarah in tonight. We'll see if we can get her another night to talk about some of the people that she knows and the things she knows. It's now 10:17 Central Standard Time, so I think we'll call it quits here tonight. And so I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for giving me your time. If you have questions about this stuff, write me. Let's talk about. We can talk about it over on Facebook. If you're on my Facebook page, just go ahead and put it in some of the posts. Let's talk about it. Let's draw some people to us that know some things. I know people who know these things. And it might be good to get them involved in the conversation. So, folks, there it is. We're all done. I want to tell you, live long and prosper, and have a good night. Good night.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.